The air in courtroom 3B was a stale concoction of old paper, cheap floor polish, and the faint acidic tang of human anxiety. It was a smell Anya Sharma knew well, a scent that clung to the dark wood paneling and the worn burgundy carpet like a shroud. She sat straight-backed on the unforgiving oak bench, her hands resting on the handle of a simple leather briefcase in her lap. Her gaze was level, sweeping the room in a slow, methodical arc that was as ingrained as breathing. She catalogued the exits, the positions of the two bailiffs, the demeanor of the prosecuting attorney, the nervous tick in the jaw of the young man sitting beside her. PFC Henderson. 22 years old, with eyes that had seen too much sand and not enough of anything else. Her own reflection was a faint ghost in the polished surface of the table before her. A woman in a dark gray pantsuit, her black hair pulled back in a severe, practical knot. Nothing remarkable, except for the slight, almost imperceptible way she held her weight, favoring her right side, and the flash of color on her left lapel. A dark blue ribbon, a silver cross pate, and a small bronze V for valor pinned at its center. The Navy Cross. It felt heavier today than it usually did. At the front of the room, enthroned behind a fortress of carved mahogany, sat Judge Marcus Thorne. He was a man who seemed to have been poured into his robes and left to sour. His face was a fleshy mask of condescension, his small, deep-set eyes scanning the docket with an air of profound boredom that bordered on contempt for everyone present. He represented the system in its most sluggish and indifferent form, a gatekeeper who had long forgotten the meaning of the words carved into the pediment above his head, Justitia Omnibus, justice for all. Anya felt Henderson shift beside her, his leg bouncing with a restless energy that betrayed the terror coiled in his gut. He was here for a disorderly conduct charge, a bar fight that had been little more than a desperate shout against the screaming in his own head. For anyone else, it would be a fine and probation. For a veteran with a spotty record since his discharge, prosecuted by an ambitious DA and judged by a man like Thorne, it could mean jail time. It could mean the unraveling of a life already hanging by a thread. "Quiet," Anya murmured, her voice low and calm, not even turning her head. The boy's leg stilled. She didn't offer false comfort. She offered presence, stability, an anchor in the swirling currents of his fear. The morning droned on. A procession of petty thefts and traffic violations, each dispatched by Thorne with a theatrical sigh and a flick of his wrist. He treated the law not as a shield, but as a fly swatter. Finally, he peered down over his spectacles. The people versus Michael Henderson. Anya rose, her movement fluid and economical. She felt the familiar dull pressure in her left leg as the prosthetic settled under her weight. She ignored it. It was just noise. "Anya Sharma, Your Honor, on behalf of the defendant." Thorne's eyes drifted from the file in his hand to her face, then slowly, deliberately, down to her lapel. His lip curled, a subtle, ugly motion. He leaned forward, his voice amplified by the microphone, filling the quiet room with a silken poison. "Ms. Sharma, before we proceed, what is that thing you're wearing?" The question hung in the air, thick and deliberate. The assistant district attorney, Alistair Finch, permitted himself a small, predatory smile. The younger of the two bailiffs, Davis, shifted his feet, looking uncomfortable but taking his cue from the judge. The older one, Miller, stood impassive by the jury box, his face a stony mask, but Anya caught the flicker in his eyes. He recognized the metal. Anya's posture didn't change. Her heart rate remained a steady, conditioned 60 beats per minute. "It is the Navy Cross, Your Honor." "Is it now?" Thorne said, leaning back as if examining a curious insect. He steepled his fingers, a parody of thoughtful jurisprudence. "It looks rather gaudy for a place of professional decorum, more like something you'd see on a parade ground, or perhaps one of those German things. An iron cross, isn't it?" The insult was precise, designed to demean, to strip the metal of its meaning and her of her dignity. It was a power play, a casual dismissal of a life he couldn't begin to comprehend. Anya could feel Henderson flinch beside her, could feel the ripple of unease in the gallery. "It is the United States Navy Cross, sir," she repeated, her voice level, devoid of the anger that Thorne was so clearly trying to provoke. "Awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat, Federal law, specifically Title 10, Section 771A of the U.S. Code, permits the bearer to wear it on their civilian attire on appropriate occasions. Thorne's smile vanished, replaced by a flush of irritation. He hated being challenged, especially with facts. I am the arbiter of what is appropriate in my courtroom, Miss Sharma, not some dusty federal statute, and I find that ostentatious military display to be entirely inappropriate. It is a distraction. It is an attempt to curry favor with the jury, should this matter proceed to trial. It is, frankly, in poor taste. He gestured dismissively with a flick of his fingers. Take it off. The order was flat. Absolute. A line drawn in the sand. Anya felt the temperature in the room drop. This was no longer about a medal. It was about authority, about respect, about a man on a throne demanding fealty. She thought of the men who had died to earn her the right to stand here. She thought of the fire and the blood and the screaming darkness of that day in the Kandahar Valley. Their faces flashed behind her eyes, ghosts standing silent witness in the stale courtroom air. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "I will not." A gasp went through the gallery. D.A. Finch's smirk widened. This was better than he could have hoped for. The veteran's advocate, thrown out for contempt. Henderson's case would be a slam dunk. Bailiff Davis took a half-step forward, his hand drifting toward his hip. Bailiff Miller remained motionless, but his gaze was fixed on Anya, and his expression was no longer stony. It was something else. Watchful. Thorne's face purpled. The mask of judicial temperament slipped, revealing the petty tyrant beneath. "You will not. Did I hear you correctly, Miss Sharma? Are you refusing a direct order from this court?" "I am respectfully declining an unlawful order, Your Honor," Anya stated, her voice a blade of cold steel. "This medal is not a prop. It is a memorial. It was awarded by the President of the United States in the name of the Congress. It represents a debt that was paid by others, a debt I have a duty to honor. I will not remove it." "A debt?" Thorne scoffed, his voice dripping with venom. "You people and your theatrics. You volunteer for these misadventures overseas, then come back expecting the world to fall at your feet. This is a court of law, not a VFW hall. I am ordering you one last time. Remove that piece of metal, or I will have you removed." He pointed a trembling finger at Bailiff Davis. "Officer, escort Miss Sharma from my courtroom, and cite her for contempt." Davis, young and eager to please the power in the room, started forward. But Miller put out a hand, a quiet, restraining gesture. "Your Honor, perhaps—" "Do it, Davis!" Thorne roared, his composure shattering completely. As Davis reached her, Anya slowly, deliberately unpinned the medal from her lapel. For a moment, Thorne's triumphant sneer returned. He had won. He had broken her. But she didn't hand it to the bailiff. She held it in her palm, its weight a familiar comfort. Then she turned to PFC Henderson, whose face was a mask of despair. She pressed the medal into his trembling hand. "Hold this for me, son," she whispered. "Don't let it touch the ground." She turned back to the judge, her hands now empty, her posture ramrod straight. "I am ready to proceed with my client's defense, Your Honor." The air crackled with a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Thorne was apoplectic, robbed of his victory. He had wanted to humiliate her, to see her yield. Instead, she had turned his demand into an act of profound reverence, passing the symbol of her sacrifice to the very person she was there to protect. He opened his mouth to thunder, to bring the full weight of his power down upon her, when the courtroom doors at the back burst open. The new case hadn't even been called. The defendants, two brothers named Alvarez, were being led in from the holding cells for sentencing on an armed robbery conviction. They were known associates of the La Sombra cartel, violent men with nothing to lose. As they entered the well of the court, a commotion erupted in the gallery. A sharp, guttural shout in Spanish, "Ahora!" 3 men stood up from the public benches, pulling compact submachine guns from beneath their long coats. The sound of bolts being racked echoed like cracks of doom in the cavernous room. Panic detonated. A collective scream tore through the air as people scrambled, tripping over benches, crawling on the floor. The 2 Alvarez brothers acted in concert. One of them spun, driving an elbow into the jaw of his escorting deputy, while the other kicked the legs out from under his. They snatched the deputy's sidearms from their holsters before the men even hit the ground. 5 armed hostiles, 2 down. Bailiff Davis, caught completely off guard, fumbled for his weapon. He was too slow. One of the gunmen in the gallery fired a short, controlled burst. The bullet stitched across the wall just above Davis's head, showering him with plaster dust and freezing him in place with sheer terror. Bailiff Miller was a different story. The old veteran reacted instantly, drawing his service pistol and shoving the court stenographer to the floor behind her desk. He got one shot off, the deep boom of his .40 caliber, a stark contrast to the high-pitched chatter of the submachine guns. One of the gunmen grunted and staggered back, clutching his shoulder, but didn't go down. Then all 5 guns turned on Miller's position. The mahogany jury box splintered under a hail of 9mm rounds, chewing the wood into a blizzard of deadly splinters. Miller was pinned down, outgunned. Judge Thorne shrieked, a high, thin sound of pure animal fear, and scrambled out of his chair, disappearing beneath the towering bench like a frightened turtle retracting into its shell. D.A. Finch was on the floor, curled into a fetal position, whimpering. The world dissolved into a cacophony of gunfire, shattering glass and screams. But for Anya Sharma, it all went quiet. The noise faded to a distant hum. The frantic motion slowed to a syrupy, predictable ballet. The panic, the chaos, the terror. It was just data, information to be processed. Her mind became a cold, clear space. The courtroom was no longer a courtroom. It was a kill box, a complex tactical problem to be solved. 5 hostiles, 3 in the gallery, elevated position, controlling the exits. 2 in the well, armed with sidearms, objective likely the judge or securing the prisoners. 2 bailiffs neutralized, 1 pinned, 1 frozen. Civilian non-combatants creating chaos. She moved, not with panic, but with a terrifying economy of motion. Her first action was to shove PFC Henderson hard, sending him sprawling under the defense table. "Stay down!" The command was not a request. It was an absolute, forged in fire. The nearest hostile was one of the Alvarez brothers, turning his stolen pistol toward the cowering form of Judge Thorne. He was 10 feet away. Anya closed the distance in 3 silent steps. Her hand shot out, not for the gun, but for his wrist, her fingers locking over the radial nerve with surgical precision. She twisted, a sharp, brutal rotation that sent a lightning bolt of agony up his arm. The man screamed, his fingers spasming open. The pistol clattered to the floor. Simultaneously, she drove her other hand, flattened into a rigid blade, into his throat. He gagged, stumbling backward, his hands flying to his crushed larynx. He was no longer a threat. She didn't wait to see him fall. She scooped up the fallen Glock 19, her hand wrapping around the grip as if it were a long-lost extension of her own body. The weight felt right. The balance perfect. She dropped into a low crouch behind a thick oak pillar, the cold stone a welcome anchor. Check magazine. Full. Chambered. Ready. The gunmen in the gallery were still focused on Bailiff Miller's position, pouring fire into the jury box. A critical error. They had target fixation. They hadn't identified the new threat, her threat. Anya leaned out from behind the pillar, just an inch. Her eyes, the gun, and the target became a single, unified instrument. The world narrowed to the front sight of the pistol. Threat 1, left gallery, firing on Miller. Distance 40 feet, unobstructed. Breathe out, squeeze. The Glock bucked in her hand, a controlled, familiar recoil. The report was sharp, authoritative. Across the room, the gunman's head snapped back as if pulled by an invisible wire. He crumpled over the railing, a marionette with its strings cut. 1 down, the other 2 gunmen spun toward her position, their faces masks of shock and rage. They opened fire, their rounds chewing craters into the marble pillar she used for cover. Stone dust filled her nostrils, the sharp scent of pulverized rock. She didn't flinch. She was already moving, crab-walking low to the ground, using the overturned benches as a shifting landscape of cover. The second Alvarez brother, the one who had taken down the other deputy, was now her most immediate problem. He was using the judge's bench as cover, popping up to fire wildly into the room. He was panicking, inaccurate, but dangerous. Anya saw Bailiff Miller lean out from his shredded cover, trying to get a clear shot. It was a fatal mistake. The remaining gunmen in the gallery saw him too. They shifted their fire. "Miller, no!" Anya's voice was a guttural bark. It was too late. A burst of gunfire caught the old bailiff in the chest. He staggered back, a look of profound surprise on his face, before collapsing behind the jury box. Rage, cold and pure, washed through Anya. It wasn't the hot, blinding anger of a civilian. It was the focused fury of a warrior. A fury she channeled into the trigger. She rose from behind a bench, a fleeting target. 2 shots, double tap, center mass. The second hostile in the gallery staggered, his weapon falling from his hands as he clutched his chest. He toppled backward into the seats, 2 down. The third gallery gunman was smarter. He dropped prone, using the bodies of his fallen comrades for cover, firing methodically at her last known position. The second, Alvarez brother, was still pinned behind the judge's bench. A tactical stalemate. But Anya didn't do stalemates. She saw the heavy brass fire extinguisher mounted on the wall near her. An idea sparked. It was a risk, a huge one. She broke cover, running not away from the gunfire, but directly toward the judge's bench. It was a suicide run. The gunman in the gallery screamed in triumph, tracking her with his muzzle. Bullets tore at the floor around her feet, kicking up splinters of wood. But she wasn't his target. She was the bait. As he focused on her, the other hostile, Alvarez, rose from behind the bench to get a clear line of fire. It was the opening she had created, the opening she needed. In one fluid motion, Anya dropped to her left knee, the one made of carbon fiber and steel. The prosthetic took the impact without a complaint. She raised the Glock, ignoring the gallery shooter entirely, and fired 3 times. Pop, pop, pop. The Alvarez brother jerked with each impact, his eyes wide with disbelief. He fell forward onto the court reporter's table, sending a cascade of papers into the air like dead leaves. 3 down. Now it was just her and the last man in the gallery. But she was exposed in the middle of the room with an empty weapon. The slide on the Glock was locked back. The last gunman stood up, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He had her. He leveled his submachine gun, taking his time. Anya didn't scramble for cover. She didn't beg. She met his gaze, her eyes cold and defiant, and as he prepared to fire, she did something he never could have anticipated. She unstrapped her left leg. With a practiced twist, she disconnected the prosthetic at the knee joint. It was a solid, heavy piece of advanced engineering. She held it in her hands like a club. The gunman paused, his mind failing to process what he was seeing. A woman on one knee, holding her own leg as a weapon. That momentary hesitation was all she needed. With a powerful full-body rotation, she hurled the prosthetic like a discus. It spun through the air, an ungainly, terrifying projectile, and smashed directly into the gunman's face with a sickening crunch of bone and carbon fiber. He dropped his weapon, screaming, clutching his shattered nose and jaw as he stumbled backward and fell. 4 down, all hostiles neutralized. Silence descended upon the courtroom, a profound, ringing silence, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded and the distant, approaching wail of sirens. Anya Sharma remained on one knee in the center of the room, her pantsuit torn, her face smudged with plaster dust. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a cold, hollow ache in its place. She crawled over to where her prosthetic lay, retrieving it from the floor next to the groaning, incapacitated gunman. Methodically, she wiped the blood from it with the sleeve of her blazer and reattached it with a familiar, solid click. Then she got to her feet. The doors burst open, and a tide of blue uniforms and black tactical gear flooded the room. SWAT officers, weapons raised, shouting commands that died on their lips as they took in the scene. The carnage, the subdued gunman, and the lone woman standing calmly amidst the wreckage. A police captain, a man with graying hair and a weary face, pushed his way to the front. "What the hell happened here?" Before anyone could answer, a small, trembling figure emerged from under the defense table. It was PFC Henderson. His eyes were wide with a terror that was slowly being replaced by something else. Awe. In his hand, he still clutched the Navy Cross, holding it like a holy relic. He walked toward Anya, his steps unsteady. He held out the medal. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion, "I think this belongs to you." Anya took it, her fingers closing around the familiar shape. She looked not at the medal, but at the young soldier's face. "You did good, Henderson. You stayed put." From behind the jury box came a pained groan. Anya was there in an instant, kneeling beside Bailiff Miller. He was alive, but barely. His uniform was soaked in blood. His breathing was shallow. "Hang on, Miller," she said, her voice gentle now. She ripped open his shirt, pressing her hands to the worst of the wounds, applying direct pressure. "Stay with me." Miller's eyes fluttered open. He looked past her at the chaos, then back to her face. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Knew you weren't no damn lawyer," he rasped. The police captain knelt beside her. "Ma'am, we need to know who you are." Anya didn't look up from her work on Miller. "I'm a veterans advocate," but it was D.A. Finch, now shakily getting to his feet and staring at Anya as if seeing a ghost, who gave the real answer. He'd prosecuted military cases before. He knew the legends. "My God," he breathed, his voice trembling. "You're Sharma, Anya Sharma. They called you Wraith." The captain's eyes widened. The name clearly meant something to him. He looked from Anya to the medal she now held in her blood-streaked hand. The pieces clicked into place. "Wraith? From SEAL Team 3? The Kandahar ambush?" The story was special operations lore, a tale told in hushed, reverent tones in barracks and ready rooms. A SEAL platoon, caught in a perfectly executed 5-point ambush, outnumbered 10-1, communications down, leadership killed in the first volley, a situation with a 0% survival probability. But one operator, their Overwatch sniper, had refused to die. Wounded, her spotter dead beside her, she had held off the enemy assault for 7 hours, repositioning constantly, becoming a ghost on the battlefield that seemed to be everywhere at once. She coordinated her own fire with a dying radio, called in a danger-close airstrike on her own position, and dragged 3 wounded teammates to the extraction chopper under withering fire. The action cost her a leg, but saved the lives of 5 men. Her call sign was Wraith. The medal she earned for it was the Navy Cross. Now, that legend was kneeling on the floor of a bloody courtroom, her hands covered in the blood of a man she was trying to save. The SWAT team members lowered their weapons. The paramedics rushed in, taking over from Anya. As they loaded Miller onto a gurney, his eyes found hers. He couldn't speak, but he lifted one hand just an inch and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect, the salute of one warrior to another. Anya stood, her work done. She looked across the room. Bailiff Davis was staring at her, his face pale, his earlier swagger completely gone, replaced by a look of profound shame and awe. D.A. Finch wouldn't meet her eyes. He just stood there, humbled and silent. And then, a sound from behind the judge's bench, a scraping, shuffling noise. Judge Marcus Thorne, his robes askew and stained with dust, crawled out from his hiding place. He looked at the bodies, at the blood, at the armed police officers. Then he saw Anya. He saw the woman he had belittled, the woman whose honor he had mocked, the woman who had just saved his miserable life. He saw the Navy Cross clutched in her hand. He saw the blood on her clothes. He saw the cold, unforgiving judgment in her eyes. In that moment, his authority, his arrogance, his entire world crumbled into dust. He was no longer a judge. He was just a small, cowardly man who had hidden while a hero fought. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. There was nothing to say. His career hadn't just ended. It had been annihilated, exposed as a hollow fraud in a crucible of violence he could never have imagined. The police captain walked over to him, his expression one of utter disgust. "Your Honor," he said, the title dripping with irony, "I think we're going to need your statement." Thorne just stared, his face a slack mask of ruin. Anya ignored him. She walked back to the defense table, her limp more pronounced now, the adrenaline finally gone. She pinned the Navy Cross back onto her lapel. The silver felt warm against the fabric. PFC Henderson watched her, his eyes shining. He stood up straighter, the slump of despair gone from his shoulders. He had just seen what true strength looked like. He had seen that honor wasn't just a word. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Anya picked up her briefcase. "Now," she said, her voice steady and calm, "we prepare for your next court date. I imagine you'll have a different judge." 3 days later, Anya Sharma walked back into courtroom 3B. The room had been cleaned, the splintered wood of the jury box replaced, the bullet holes in the walls expertly patched and painted over. But the air was different. The oppressive weight was gone. It felt like a space where justice might actually be possible. A new judge sat on the bench, a stern-faced woman with a reputation for fairness and integrity. Judge Thorne had been suspended indefinitely, pending a judicial conduct investigation that everyone knew would end with his permanent removal. The story of his cowardice had spread like wildfire. Anya took her place at the defense table. PFC Henderson sat beside her, wearing a crisp suit she had helped him buy. He looked like a different person. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet resolve. As the new judge called the court to order, Anya's gaze drifted to the bailiff's station by the jury box. A new man stood where Miller had stood, young, sharp, professional. Miller, she had been told, was in stable condition. He would survive. He would even walk again. Her eyes then moved to the other station by the main doors. Bailiff Davis stood there. When he saw her looking, he didn't smirk or look away. He straightened his shoulders, brought his heels together with a soft click, and gave her a short, sharp nod. It was a gesture of deference, an apology, and a promise, all in one. Anya acknowledged it with a slight inclination of her head. The case was called The People versus Michael Henderson. The new DA, a young woman who looked at Anya with undisguised respect, stood up. Your Honor, the people have reviewed this case. In light of Mr. Henderson's service record and the circumstances of the incident, we move to dismiss all charges. The judge looked over Henderson's file, then at Anya. The court agrees. Charges dismissed. Mr. Henderson, you are free to go. Good luck to you. It was over, just like that. As they packed their briefcases, Henderson turned to her. How can I ever thank you? Stay out of trouble, soldier, Anya said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Get the help you need. That's thanks enough. She walked out of the courtroom and into the main hall of the courthouse. The usual morning bustle was underway, but it parted for her. Lawyers, clerks, and police officers stepped aside, their conversations quieting as she passed. They didn't stare. They simply made way. Their respect was a silent, palpable thing, a force field of recognition that followed her down the long marble corridor. She pushed open the heavy bronze doors and stepped out into the bright morning sun. The city noise washed over her, the traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of people on the steps. It was a world she had fought to protect, a world she was still fighting for, just on a different battlefield. She paused on the top step, her hand rising unconsciously to her lapel. Her fingers brushed against the cool, familiar metal of the Navy Cross. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a decoration. It was a compass, a reminder of the cost, of the promise, of the duty that would be with her until her last breath. She felt the weight of it, not as a burden, but as an anchor. Taking a deep breath of the free air, Anya Sharma straightened her blazer and walked down the steps to face the day. There was more work to be done.